I'm here to sign up for life insurance. That's great faith. I guess you don't understand what it is anymore.
It's so slow.
That's what. They couldn't transplant by themselves. As a unit. Gee, and like because he says it's like web. So they could just do the whole unit with the heart there. That worked. So that's what it was 30 years ago. Just turned 70. He slowed down. Remember Dwight Hart? He was a big the older people get smaller. Your body adjusts the right heart. Your heart gets weak. I thought it was gravity. I've lost an inch or 2.5. Well, that's just spine collapse.
Welcome and thank you so much for attending the Democracy Town Hall today. My name is Olivia Zink and I'm the Executive Director of Open Democracy Action, and we're a nonpartisan nonprofit here in Concord. But today's forum is co-sponsored, and please give me a second because it's going to take a while, by Open Democracy Action, Equal Citizen, New Hampshire Independent Voters, New Hampshire Labor News, New Hampshire Ranked Choice Voting, Fix It America, the Committee for Ranked Choice Voting, New Hampshire Voters Restoring Democracy, Stamp Stampede, American Promise, UU Action, Fair Vote, Take Back Our Republic, Protect Democracy, and Common Cause. So a round of applause for all the sponsors in today's forum. So I have some questions for the Senator, which will start for the first part of this forum, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, which are on index cards, and feel free to write additional index cards as the forum is happening. But we're going to start. I'm going to introduce the Senator. Senator is a businessman, a lawyer, and a senior senator from Colorado. Senator Bennet has worked in the private sector and the public sector, and as the superintendent of the Denver Public Schools. He lives in Denver with his wife and 3 daughters, and I'm going to give him a second to add to that introduction and tell us why democracy is important to him.
Well, that's a big question. Let me, can you hear me now? I'll say this at the outset. I'm the only candidate in this race that actually has called for supporting ranked choice voting from the federal level, and I am the only candidate for this race who has an eldest daughter who's fighting in Connecticut for ranked choice voting. So it runs in the family. Thank you very much. Do you want me to answer that question? Yeah, I mean, I think we're at this incredibly significant inflection point in the history of our democracy, and it's an existential inflection point. I was asked the other day by a woman in a town hall just like this, what Western democracy can address climate change. And I said, you've just asked the most existential question that anybody's asked during this campaign, because our institutions are in rubble today. And if you are Mitch McConnell, the rubble suits your purpose. If you're the Freedom Caucus, the rubble suits your purpose, because you're not actually trying to get anything done except put right-wing judges on the courts and occasionally cut taxes for rich people. If you want to solve climate change, you can't accept the rubble. You know, you can't accept the world where I put my ideas in for 2 years, the other side rips them out. I put them in for 2 years, the other side rips them out. Because you can't solve climate 2 years at a time. I don't think we can solve anything 2 years at a time. And the only way democracy is going to be able to create not just urgent policy with respect to climate, but policy that can actually last for a generation, which is what we need to do, is if we have a functioning democracy. And if we don't have a functioning democracy, we don't have functioning democratic institutions, and the billionaires are able to influence the political system the way they have, or prevent people from voting who should otherwise be eligible to vote, we're not going to be able to do any of this. So that's why democracy is important to me, and it's really why I'm running for president.
Great, and I want to thank you so much for co-sponsoring the For the People Act, which is the largest democracy reform package that Congress has ever seen, that tackles corruption and restores people's trust in democracy. So why did you co-sponsor this legislation?
Well, because Nancy Pelosi was kind enough to include a bunch of stuff that I'd written in her bill, and so I figured the reasonable thing to do was support it. So I was the first member of Congress in either the House or the Senate to write a bill that would end political gerrymandering in this country. And Nancy didn't include exactly my bill, but the bill, there's a lot of overlap between the anti-gerrymandering stuff that was in my bill and what she included there. My bill would create, but first it would ban gerrymandering for political reasons and for partisan reasons, and it would give individuals a cause of action to bring a lawsuit to say that that somebody had done it for political reasons. So if I were president of the United States, I've been asked this everywhere, so you can look it up. People ask you often, what would you do on your first day? And one of the 3 things I would do on my first day is a version of H.R. 1. It'd be a more robust version of H.R. 1 because it would include my gerrymandering bill. It would include, I was the second senator, actually Tom Udall wrote the bill to overturn Citizens United, the constitutional amendment. I was the first senator to sign up as a co-sponsor on that bill. That would be part of my day one activity as President of the United States. I've had a bill that for years and years and years I haven't been able to get anybody interested until very, very recently. But it is a bill that would say that if you have had the privilege of serving as a member of the Senate or a member of the House, you should accept a lifetime ban on ever becoming a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. I'll put you down as a co-sponsor. I couldn't get anybody on it, and then one day AOC and Ted Cruz both rolled out of bed, separate beds, but decided that they wanted to be on legislation like this. And I said, well, I have it, and the reason I've had it is that over half the people that leave the Congress and don't retire become lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And then whatever I could get in that bill that I've also included in my proposals so that every 18-year-old was auto-enrolled on the polls, so that we had mail-in ballots that people could have for 3 weeks before they voted. All the things, many of the things we do in Colorado, which has created a state that has the second highest voter participation rate of any state in the country. If Amy Klobuchar were here, she would tell you Minnesota is the #1. So she doesn't need to come because I just told you that. But I do think it will make a huge difference if we're voting at a 70% rate than at a 50% rate, because this isn't just about beating Donald Trump. It is about restoring the democracy and governing the country again, and it's going to be hard to do that with low voter participation rates.
Great, so we're going to turn to campaign finance reform. We have a democracy where members of Congress spend a lot of time raising money. And how would you change the way elections are funded?
Well, I support the idea of publicly funding elections. I think it's going to be a long time before that actually happens at the national level, but it's a real problem in our political system, and it's still a problem. Now Bernie and Elizabeth talk about how this is great because we don't have big donors anymore. Big donors come with problems. Small donors come with problems, because what you discover is that if people need to excite people out in the world to raise money for them, it could lead people, I'm not saying it does always, but it could lead people to make empty promises that can't actually be fulfilled as a way of trying to generate small dollar campaign contributions. So there is no great solution, I think, other than publicly financing our campaigns, and someday I hope we'll do that.
Well, great, and so you lead right into my next question. You have proposed a public funding through small donor match for the federal elections. Some states have done public funding through grants, and other municipalities have done public funding through democracy vouchers, such as Seattle, where each voter gets 4 $25 certificates. And so can you tell me more about why small donor is the right path that you think for the federal level?
I just think the more involvement you can get and the opportunity for people to be able to participate is really important, and notwithstanding the caution that I mentioned earlier about what's happening on social media today with our political system, which is a whole other issue that I hope we deal with at some point during the conversation. Okay, good.
So when we think about, we're almost 10 years from the anniversary of Citizens United. So 10 years, our democracy has seen unlimited money pour into our system. You talked a little bit about the Udall Amendment, but could you elaborate more about what we need to do to overturn Citizens United?
Is it all right if I stand up, or should I stand?
Yeah,
that's I got there in 2010, so I've been in the Senate for 10 years. I wasn't really in politics before. I guess you could say being a school superintendent is pretty political. It can be. Actually, it makes this job look really easy by comparison. That was the year that Citizens United was decided by the Supreme Court. And my race was the first race in that year. It was the race where there was more outside money spent than any other race in the country. Because I represent a purple state, it's tough to win. I'm the only candidate in this race that's won 2 national elections in a swing state. Nobody else has won 1 national election in a swing state. And they knew I was the most vulnerable Democrat, which I was. And that's why the Koch brothers put more money in Colorado than any race in the country. So that was a little bit of a baptism by fire. And I've said often during this campaign that reading the Supreme Court majority's opinion in Citizens United is like reading a 7th grader's American government paper, because of its incredible lack of sophistication about how our government works. I've stopped saying that because I've decided it's an unfair insult to 7th graders to say it. But it gives you a flavor of how bad the decision is. And there's the ignorance, I don't know if there are any lawyers in the room, but, I won't bore you to death on this, but for the lawyers in the room, this decision, this seismic decision in our politics that's led to billionaires being able to write unlimited checks and not even have to disclose who they are in our political system, was decided without any factual record at all. The case came up on a preliminary injunction, and the court supplied their own facts. So, for example, the court said, okay, we're dealing with the problem of direct donations, and we're dealing with the problem of independent expenditures. So if you give me $5,000 and I go write a bill for you, that's corrupt, and we should limit that and deal with that. And so it was okay for Congress in McCain-Feingold to do that. Then they said, okay, but if you give me $5,000 and I go write a bill that's consistent with what you want, even if you didn't ask me to do it, it could raise an impression of corruption, a concern about an appearance of corruption, they called it, and we should be able to regulate that. But they then looked at the question of independent expenditures, and they said, because these entities are independent, by definition, they can't be corrupt. And because they're independent, by definition, they can't even give the appearance of corruption, and therefore they will not cause the American people to lose faith in their democracy. That's the words. That's what they said. 96% of Americans say there's too much money in our politics. 95% of Americans say that billionaires have too much control over our politics, and that's all a result of Citizens United. And it isn't about actually an appearance of corruption. It's actual corruption. The thing the court missed, though, is it's not a corruption of action. It's a corruption of inaction. It's not you giving me $5,000 and my hiding it in the icebox and going and writing a bill, that suits you. It is the Koch brothers rattling the coins in their pocket. They don't even have to spend money anymore. And saying, oh, really? You're going to have a bill on climate change, or you're going to have a committee hearing on climate change, or you're going to not get rid of the tax benefits that, try to get rid of the tax benefits of the fossil fuel industry? Well, you can do that, but if you do it, we're going to put $30 million or whatever amount of money we want into a primary against you the next time you run for office. And that is the core of what has created a corruption of inaction in our federal government. So you want to know why we can't get anything done down there. There are all kinds of reasons. Partisan gerrymandering is a huge reason. But Citizens United is as huge a reason as that, because the billionaires can manipulate the process without, by the way, anybody even knowing that it's happening, because it's hard to see those coins rattling around in their pockets. And so what we have to do on Citizens United is we should pass a bill in the Congress that requires the disclosure of this money, so there's no more dark money in our politics. We can do that without a constitutional amendment. And if I were elected president, I would lead the fight in all 50 states to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot to overturn Citizens United, because that's what we have to do. And if you think it's impossible to amend the Constitution, let me just remind you, and I'll stop here, although I care a lot about this thing. The last Gilded Age did not end itself in America. It was ended by groups just like this group that were meeting all over America for 3 decades to say, we got to reform our politics. And some really important constitutional amendments came out of that. We passed an amendment to ensure that women would have the right to vote. So my 3 daughters now have the right to vote because of people sitting in a room just like this 100 years ago. And the same thing with, we had senators bribing their way through state legislatures, because back then we were appointed by state legislatures. Then we go down to Washington and give ourselves railroad rights of way. That's what we were doing. Believe it or not, it was even more corrupt than it is today. We said, no, that's enough of that. And we had passed a constitutional amendment to directly elect senators. So you guys are part of a venerable and successful tradition of reform, and we're going to have to repeat that tradition of reform in the, I hope, when Donald Trump is no longer our president. So that's my answer on Citizens United.
Great, you covered my next question about disclosure too.
Oh, good, because I saw some people saying, is this going to be going all day? No, I just...
How would the Bennett administration fight corruption, and what other plans do you have for corruption?
Just corruption generally. I mean, I think the anti-lobbying stuff that I've put in, I've got suggestions that says, or bills that would say to members of Congress, you can't raise money from lobbyists when you're actually meeting in legislative session in Washington, which would make it really inconvenient for people to raise money from lobbyists anymore. All of the things that are in my proposals to make it easier for people to vote are meant to be anti-corruption measures, because I think the more people vote, the less easy it is for special interests to corrupt our politics, no matter who they are. And one dimension of this that I don't know if you'll talk about separately, but it's corruption in a sense, certainly corruption of our democracy, is we have to get foreign actors out of our democracy. And I care so much, I brought this to you as a present. This is a book that I wrote, and if you, at a certain point in the campaign, I don't know if you can still do it, you can buy one for like $5 on my website, and I'll send it to Mitch McConnell's office in Kentucky. But what this is full of is, on your behalf, like you could do it as a Christmas gift. But this is full of Russian propaganda that for a year we didn't know it was Russian propaganda. We couldn't distinguish it from our own crazy stuff on social media. You'll see the most vile, the most racist stuff in here. And I put it in a book because I thought it was important for the American people to know two things. One, what does it say about us that we couldn't distinguish this from our own conversation with each other, political conversation? And two, what does it say about us that the Russians see our differences as something for them to exploit, to divide us? And I see our pluralism as a strength, not as a weakness. So that's why I published this. So that's another kind of corruption that Mitch McConnell is unwilling to address.
Great, so let's talk about gerrymandering. Your plan was the Fair Maps of 2018, right. Which bans partisan gerrymandering. Right now we know Congress is filled with district seats, and there's not very many competitive seats. So tell us more about the Fair Maps Act and what we can do to make sure that no district favors any incumbents or picks a party that they like.
Yeah, so I know you guys were trying. I don't know if I imagine you guys were involved in the work here in New Hampshire.
Representative Smith.
Yeah, Marjorie Smith. Yeah, and then they got it passed, and then the governor vetoed the bill that they passed. We passed a similar bill in Colorado. The governor did not veto it in Colorado, and as a result, we have an independent commission that writes our districts, and that's the way it ought to work. And what my bill does is it doesn't tell local communities how to do it. It just says that if you do it for political reasons, it's illegal. And if you do it for political reasons, then an individual can have a cause of action, take you to court, and overturn whatever it is you've done. And if you've got a bipartisan commission, and there are a couple other kinds of things, they can create sort of a safe harbor that protects the work that was done from an assault, saying that it was partisan. And that's the way I think it ought to be done. And I think it is critically important, and I'll tell you why. I don't know if you remember where you were the night that Barack Obama became president, but I remember it very well. And he was standing in Grant Park in Chicago, and I was sitting in a rental house in Colorado. I wasn't in the Senate. I was a school superintendent. And of the 95,000 kids in my old school district, most of them are kids of color, and most of them are kids living in poverty. I might mention, by the way, that little school district of mine has a budget 3 times the size of South Bend, Indiana. I digress. So, and what I was thinking about was how important this was going to be for the kids in my old school district. That from now on, when they thought about what a president looked like, they think about Barack Obama. Just like my own kids who are members in the Democratic Party, they think about Barack Obama. What I didn't imagine then was the forces of reaction that would set in. And I should have. I mean, they're not unknown in human history. They're certainly not unknown in our history. But that's what happened. A month later, I was in the Senate. And what my arrival in the Senate coincided with was the rise of what was then called the Tea Party. It later became the Freedom Caucus. The decision in Citizens United, which happened, as I said, in 2010 at exactly the same time. And that coincided with an election in 2010 that was the rise of the Tea Party. And these guys gerrymandered the entire country, which is why today in Pennsylvania and in Ohio and in Florida and in Wisconsin and all over the country, and it's not just at the federal level, at the local level too, districts are gerrymandered. And this has been the most profound threat to our democracy, the combination of the gerrymandering with Citizens United. These people went there on a philosophy that was not a Republican philosophy, or at least it wasn't recognizable as a conventional Republican philosophy. They went advocating basically Sarah Palin's constitutional history of the United States. That's what they brought to Washington. And they have immobilized our exercise in self-government ever since. And that's what the Freedom Caucus has all been about. And this has been very costly to our country. For one thing, it delivered us Donald Trump, because enough people in America said, well, we can't possibly do any worse. We might as well send a reality TV star to blow the place up. But it also has meant that we can't even pass a basic infrastructure bill, because if you're the Freedom Caucus, you think that sounds to you like more government. So while China's building 3,500 miles of fiber optic cable to connect Latin America with Africa back to China to export the surveillance state in China, which is not good for democracy, we can't even pass a basic infrastructure bill, much less address climate change. And so that's why the issues that you're working on are so critical, because unless we reform our democracy, we're not going to be able to change it. And the evidence is the 10 years that I've been in the Senate. And I'd like not to take the blame for that, if that's okay, while I'm here. But I will say it's why when Joe Biden says, you know, if we just get rid of Trump, it'll all go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. And what we have to do is go forward to a reformed, progressive era where we can actually address these issues. And we need to address them before we're going to be able to get any of this other stuff done.
So do you support restoring the Voting Rights Act?
I do. That's actually that's the other leg of the stool here, because the court did Citizens United, the court rated the Voting Rights Act, and the court said we're not going to pass on gerrymandering. We're going to leave that in the hands of the politicians. And those three things together. So yes, A, yes, and B, anything that anybody in this room can do to make sure every eligible person is registered to vote and votes is also a very important reform of our democracy and in service of what the Voting Rights Act was trying to do as well.
And so tell us a little bit more about why you support ranked choice voting.
Thank you. I have not said that it should be mandatory across the country. What I've said is that the federal government, if I'm president, would support financially places that were trying to do ranked choice voting. And the reason why I think it sounds like a really interesting idea is that I think it would help reduce the polarization that exists in our democracy. If a lot of times, you know, with the binary choice that we have today, you might end up not electing somebody to Congress that doesn't actually reflect the majority view of the people in the district they represent. If you have ranked choice voting, I think there's a much more likely chance that that will be the result. And the results in Maine, I think, suggest that that's the way the outcomes would work. And so I think, like with anything else that's brand new, we ought to experiment with it before we commit entirely to it. But that's why I think it is important. And I also think it's another way of diminishing the influence of the extremes in our politics and also special interests in our politics.
Okay, I'm going to go from questions from the audience. So people of color have disproportionately seen voter disenfranchised due to felon status. Do you see felon voting as an issue of attention, expanding the right of people who have been incarcerated, or do you support the right to vote after they've served their prison time?
I would say after you've served your prison time, and among many other ways in which we have to do a better job of reintegrating people when they come from prison, not making it hard, also possible for them to be in public housing, making it hard for them to have jobs. We should be restoring their right to vote. But I would do it after people have served their time.
Okay, so this next question is a little bit long, but Harvard Business School professor of strategy says that our federal political system isn't broken, it's fixed. It's actually designed to do what it's it's actually designed to do what it's supposed to do. It's a classic system problem where the structural campaign finance system, the outcome of improper representation and broader electoral influence. To fix this, we must reform all or enough of the dysfunctional parts, so to produce proper representation. Post this election, are you willing to lead on this, and if so, how?
Yes, I'm not going to repeat some of the things we've already talked about, but I do believe, and you can look it up and make your own judgment, but I believe that I've got by far the most far-reaching reform agenda of anybody in this race in terms of political reform. And I've committed over and over again in this election that I would begin that the first day that I was president for all the reasons that I've said. And you know, I will go so far as to say that as somebody who's actually worked in our public education system, I believe that the reform of our schools is an important reform for our democracy. In other words, we live in a place where over the last 50 years, we've had no economic mobility for most of the American people. 90% of the American people haven't seen any benefit when our economy has grown. What's even worse than that, our education system today is reinforcing the income inequality we have, because the best predictor of the quality of a kid's education is the income that their parents have. That is deeply unfair, and it's antithetical to who we're supposed to be, as I mentioned earlier, a pluralistic society where we are only as strong as in my mind, we're only strong when everybody in the society has the chance to participate meaningfully. When you're getting a lousy education, it's hard for you to participate meaningfully. When there's no economic mobility, it's hard for you to participate meaningfully. And when the system shuts you out because of Citizens United or gerrymandering or because of the special interest money in our politics, the system's not including you. So this is a countrywide, democracy-wide, economy-wide effort. So to that extent, I agree with the sentiment of the person from Harvard, except that I don't think we can accept a design of it that allows us to get nothing done, because the next generation desperately needs us to get some stuff done.
Great. So, Senator, at last night's debate, the idea of automatic voter registration for all 18 or older was addressed. Do you find this realistic or feasible? And if yes, how would you operationalize it?
I proposed it before anybody on that stage talked about it, so yeah, I believe in it, I agree with it. And I think we would work with the states to figure out how to do it. I suppose there's a good role for the federal government to spend some money there, just as we need to spend money on election protection across the country, working with the Secretary of State's offices. We've got a huge job to do to coordinate the defense of our voting against the Russians, and by the way, not just the Russians now, but also the Chinese. And if you don't think that's a big deal, I know everybody here does, but for people that don't think it's a big deal, imagine what it's going to be like when we wake up one morning and we don't really know whether we can have faith in the vote count from the night before. That's kind of the end of democracy, and that's why we've got to protect it, which is why it's so insane that McConnell won't put the election protection legislation on the floor. So I would figure out how to do it, and I think it's a great idea. I think we should do it. If people don't want to vote, they can always take their name off the rolls.
So do you support open primaries for independent voters? In some states, people must register for a party in order to vote in the primary.
I actually do support open primaries. I think and I would support a total open primary system, which would allow anybody to vote in any primary. We don't have that in Colorado today. Our system, where we've got a state that's similar in some ways to New Hampshire, it's almost exactly a third Republican, Democratic, and Independent. Actually, independents are the fastest growing, and they're now more independents than there are Democrats or Republicans, and they can pick one or the other. But people that are registered as Democrats or Republicans can only vote in the place where the party they've registered at. For to me, I would just have open primaries.
So places 16-year-old voters have proven better voter turnout and are lifelong voters. Do you support or oppose 16-year-olds?
I actually, honestly, have not thought about it, so I will think about it and give you an answer, but I don't want to give you an answer until I've reflected on it. And I'm thinking, when I'll give you some sense of where my perspective on this comes from. When I was deciding whether to run for president, which was not something I planned to do, and I sort of came late to this, I went home. We've got 3 daughters who are 20, 19 and 15. She was 14 at the time, though. And I asked him, what do you think, should I run? And the 14-year-old said immediately, yes, you definitely should run. And I thought, that's great that you have such a profound interest in my public service and my leadership. And then the more we talked, the more it became clear that she saw it as this really excellent way for me to be away from her during her 15th year, which has largely been true. She could be burning the place down for all I know while I'm here. And actually, she got her learner's permit in the 15th year, and on day 1 wrecked my car. So I'll have to see if I can get into a more objective frame of mind. But in that context, I'll consider it.
So welcome. Tell us your views on voter suppression and on registration efforts.
So we have huge voter suppression things going on around the country, all over the country. It's serious business. I think it's embarrassing, to the democracy that there would be people in the democracy who don't think their ideas will carry, and therefore they work to suppress the right of people to vote in places like Ohio and North Carolina and many places across the country. And I can see it too. This is a little less active, but when you look at what's involved in just getting on the ballot in different states for an election like running for president, a lot of these rules are set up and they're designed to make it hard for people to participate, or costly for people to participate, which is the opposite of how I think this ought to work. So we should not pretend that the suppression isn't a real thing and meant to particularly suppress the vote of people of color in this country. And I've gone over the stuff that I would do to make sure that we were getting more participation. Interestingly enough, a lot of the stuff in this book. That's a good idea. I should have thought of that earlier. But a lot of this stuff in the book is directly intended to suppress the vote. Like, it's pictures of African American people saying, Hillary Clinton's the worst person on the planet. Why would you ever vote? Or, they just had us in slavery. Why would you ever vote? Here's one right here. And this again, this was Russian propaganda. So it's amazing stuff.
And we talked a little bit about Citizens United, but this question says we're 32 days from the 10th anniversary of Citizens United, but also 35 days from the 110th birthday of Open Democracy's founder, Granny B. And so she walked across country 20 years ago now. Her grandson is here in the audience. She lives just near here. So what do you think about walking across country? And you already really addressed Citizens United earlier.
Yeah, but I do think, first of all, it was very powerful at the time. I remember that when she did it. What do I think about walking across the country? I'd love to walk across the country. For one thing, I'd be able to work off what this campaign has been doing to me. But when I said earlier that I wanted to lead a fight in all 50 states for Citizens United, I meant it. And I think that wouldn't be a greater tonic for our democracy than a president who is leading us in that reform effort, because it's something that we could pass in all 50 states, I think. And it would, I think, be a way to mobilize the next generation of Americans. We've got a whole bunch of people in America who have never lived in a society where democracy worked. My kids never have lived in a society where democracy worked. We got a whole bunch of kids in America who have never lived in a country that hasn't been at war. Our country's been at war for 20 years. And they deserve to know that there's something better than that. And I think engaging them in the effort of overturning Citizens United would be a great way to mobilize them in an effort to get the money out of our politics and to get people. And I think that could be really exciting. I mean, it could lead to lots of other things. Our democracy is sick for many, many reasons. I mean, we haven't yet talked about social media, but should I say a word about that? I mean, I had dinner not that long ago with Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook. He has no idea what Facebook is doing to our democracy, and it's having a profound effect. It opened us up to, the guy at Twitter. He obviously understands the damage that's done, because unlike Zuckerberg, who's saying, "I'll take fake ads from politicians as long as you'll pay me for them, and I won't judge whether they're fake or whether they're not." At Twitter, they've said, "We're going to ban political advertising from our platform." That's a patriotic act by an American corporation that didn't have to do that, but they did it because they thought this is the right thing for us to do for our country. And we got to engage our business community in this discussion as well, I think, in order to help us save the time.
So the next question says, tell us about your plan to control defense spending and their lobbyist. I know you've sponsored the Lobbyist and Campaign Reform Act in 2015, as well as a new bill in 2018, the Clean Politics Act. So tell us a little bit about lobbyist reform and defense.
Yeah, the lobbyist reform is mostly about getting money out of our political system during sessions when we're meeting in Washington, because if candidates can't raise money while they're there, it's going to make it really hard for them to raise money because they're back in their states or their districts the rest of the time. That's what that's meant to do. And on defense spending, I tweeted out something last night, or was it last night? Yeah, I said between votes, I redlined the president's 6-page letter to Congress. And I don't know if any of you saw that, but among other things, I took the sentence where he said the biggest defense budget, since forever, and said, yeah, it's the same size it was when we had 200,000 people in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm not sure why we ought to be proud about that, because we no longer have 200,000 places, and we're hopefully winding down these wars. Why should the defense budget be the size it was when we were fighting, at the height of fighting 2 wars in the Middle East? So, moreover, we've got a whole bunch of new technology that we need to think about in terms of our defense going forward. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing. I mean, these are things that may allow us to massively reduce the expenditures that we make on our Defense Department. Although there's something so foolhardy now that we're not even keeping up with China. We're spending all this money, and we're probably spending it on the wrong stuff rather than spending it on the right.
So the next question is around universal national service and everyone sort of training together, all colors, all classes, and as a way of participation. So it looks like the person asks about Peace Corps or other services that people can do to give back to this country.
So I was born in New Delhi, India, because my parents were working for our embassy there. They weren't in the Foreign Service, but they were working for our ambassador there. And I was raised by 2 parents that couldn't have had more different backgrounds. My dad had come over. Public service was very noble because he spent his in public service. I've been a very strong support. John McCain and I worked together for many years to strengthen the service we have, and I don't think there's anything that would unify our country more than having a more robust national service program than we do. When I was the school superintendent, brought to Denver all kinds of national service models, city year, because I saw how important they could be for our kids in Denver. But now that I'm a senator, if I could offer to every veteran that was returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, looking it through, I'll be quick.
Electoral college reform.
I'm for it. I'll be dead by the time it happens. So let's.
Okay. Why do you think your leader is nation's crisis in leadership.
Here's what I would, if we're in very simple terms, if you were looking for the opposite of Donald Trump, I'm the opposite of Donald Trump. I think that we need a president and restore integrity to our government. Have the agenda to do that, the agenda not just to unify the Democratic Party, which we have to do, but to win back some of the 9 million people that voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. And as I said, I'm the only candidate in this race that's ever won election in a purple state. And I think that's going to be really important going into this election, because the only way we're going to beat Donald Trump is by winning purple states in this country. We're just not going to do it.
Thank everyone for coming. I think there'll be a
gun control. What are your feelings?
So this is an issue that I've worked on for a long time, because Columbine High School, which was one of the first happened in Colorado, and right before my oldest daughter Caroline was over the country, my kids have grown up in the shadow of school for something that none of us ever had to worry about. The knowledge and the Second Amendment doesn't say that you're entitled to carry a 100-round magazine around with you. So that's what I would do.
I'm the guy who asked that long question that
The
because of my
Harvard
age 78 shaky handwriting caused Olivia to struggle and butcher a little
On the
bit.
contrary, you should be
But
running for
afterwards, and on my watch and yours, it has gotten worse, and it will continue
No
to get
question.
worse until we fix
No
it.
question.
And we need leaders to help
no question.
advance it.
No question. And I really do think, I mean, that I had an agenda on this stuff before I started running for president that's as progressive as anybody in the race, and would have, if we could enact it, a real effect. So if I don't win this election, I'll go back and run again for the Senate and hope I get reelected, and continue to fight for these things. And I would say also that unlike some people in this race, I'm not naive about how difficult it is to deal with Mitch McConnell and the Freedom Caucus. You know, these people have to be beaten. They have to be overcome. And that is not going to happen unless we are focused on beating them, and unless we run on an agenda that can allow us to beat them. And for the last 10 years, it's just gotten worse, not better, on judges, on climate. And in a democracy, the only way you can actually overcome tyranny, which is what we're facing, is by winning these elections. And so that's what I would also continue to do, is to make sure we're fighting to win in unusual states. And by the way, it's not very complicated. I mean, to me, if we nominate somebody with an agenda that Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan can rally behind, we'll win. We'll beat Donald Trump. If we nominate somebody and run an agenda that those guys can't rally behind, we're probably going to lose to Donald Trump.
If I could just follow up a teeny bit. Many of the things that, we all know sensibly need to be done, just simply aren't happening because of the dysfunction which our system has created,
Right.
which prevents them from being implemented.
Right.
So my question really is, if Congress won't fix the problem that it is empowered and logically should be fixing, how do we fix it, and what are you willing to do?
It's going to be
lead?
very hard to fix it unless we can fix it by winning elections, I think. I mean, I just don't think people that come here and tell you that the answer is changing the filibuster rule or putting more judges on the courts, I think aren't coming with real answers. I think the real answers are you got to win. I mean, if there are things that I can do to get special interests out of our politics by executive order when I'm president, I'll gladly do those things. But I think to get to the structural reforms we need to get to, we got to do the hard work of winning these elections. And that's hard, but we got to do it. We haven't been trying that hard. I don't think we're trying that hard. Not that you're not trying hard. And by the way, it's also the reason why there's some debate in the party right now about whether what we want to do is just have more dysfunction. You know, if what we're going to do is meet dysfunction with dysfunction. And I think that will be the destruction of our democracy once we go down that road. And again, McConnell doesn't care because he's not trying to do climate change. He's not trying to build infrastructure. He's just trying to put judges on the courts. We're trying to create a set of sustainable policies that can restore opportunity again in the country and do something useful for the next generation of America's place in the world. We're not going to be able to do that. As I said earlier, 2 years at a time. I don't think we're going to be able to do that with a broken set of institutions. I wrote another book that's a real book called The Land of Flickering Lights, Restoring American Democracy During an Era of Broken Politics. It has nothing to do with me. It is about our democracy. And if you feel like reading it, that's at least my view of what we have to do to fix the democracy and overcome the dysfunction that we have.
Thank you so much for being here today, and I really do have faith that together we can fix our broken democracy.
I do too, and I'm glad you guys are doing what you're doing. Don't give up. Don't relent.
Senator, two-part question. Where do you stand on Larson's 2100 Act to fix Social Security to add to what we have? And the other part of the question is, what will you do to help the inadequacy of the average Social Security checks? 17,529.
Yep.
By the time you pay that.
I gotta look at Larson's bill. I gotta look at it, but in general, I'm for lifting the cap, and I'm for making benefits more generous for the poorest seniors. That's basically where I am. But let me get you an answer on Larson. I gotta go, right, Alex? Thank you very much for your attention and for your time and for being here.